I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us today. Without no further introduction, I told them a few words about you. So without further introduction, I'm just handing over the mic to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for allowing me to be part of your event today. It's my pleasure to talk to you about business-driven project management. I'll speak to this from the perspective of project managers and PMO managers. And if at any time anyone has a question, please feel free to interrupt me. And if what I'm saying is not clear or if we have audio problems, please feel free as well to interrupt me. So let's get started. The agenda that I'd like to go through this morning will consist of a short perspective on traditional project management from the perspective of a case study example. And this leads into a very good introduction to the concept of business-driven project management, which is a great fit for the theme about mammoths being agile. So let's get started. In this real-life case study example, a CEO of a company proposed the idea of a PMO to a leadership team. The company was a high-growth company. The company had enjoyed success. And the company was having difficulties with the challenges of growth and success. In particular, the company was having difficulties with all of the project opportunities that they had before it. So the CEO of the company proposed the idea of having a PMO to the leadership team, and the leadership team all was very enthusiastic about the idea of having a PMO, each for their own reasons. And they interviewed a number of PMO candidates, and 2 candidates made the final list to be selected to be hired as the PMO manager. One candidate was an experienced PMO manager that had set up PMOs, implemented processes and tools. And the other PMO manager was not an experienced PMO manager, but had a great deal of business experience. And the leadership team liked both candidates. But in the end, they chose the PMO manager that already had experience setting up PMOs. And this PMO manager had a credential. He was a certified project management professional. And so they hired that manager, the first PMO manager of the short list. And in the first week, the leadership team each met with the PMO manager. And in week 2, this PMO manager presented his strategy for the PMO and for project management. Now, many of you might be thinking that's very fast, a PMO strategy in week 2. What could such a strategy be? Well, I would share with you that each of you know what the strategy was already. What was it? People, process, tools, and let's throw in some training. Well, the PMO manager, after his second week on the job, presented his strategy for the PMO with a recommendation to form a small PMO team to implement a project management tool that he had had familiarity with at another company, to implement a methodology aligned to the latest PMBOK guide standard, and to implement a training strategy. And all of this was the idea, the plan that the PMO manager thought was best. So after 6 months, how do you think the PMO was going? Was the PMO manager up for a pay raise? Or was the PMO at risk of being closed? Well, the vice president of sales was unhappy because it was taking too long to get new projects underway. And one of his reasons for wanting a PMO was that 50% of the sales revenue was project related, professional services projects. And the sales vice president wanted the ability to do more projects, but yet the PMO actually slowed the process down. The vice president of professional services was unhappy because the methodology that the PMO manager developed, though it was aligned to the PMBOK guide, did not fundamentally address the project issues that the vice president of professional services had, mainly the sales teams, after the professional services statement of work had been agreed to, of changing the scope and agreeing to additional scope by the customer. The vice president of business development was unhappy because all of the business development projects to work with business partners and channel partners that never got enough resources were now not getting enough resources as well. The product development manager was unhappy with the PMO because his top problem was the vice president of sales that would take resources from product development to support high-value sales opportunities, which resulted in compromising the product development schedule. The CFO was unhappy because none of the data in the project management tool could be used for revenue forecasting and recognition, and half of this company's business was project-based revenues. And the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, and the CEO were concerned because their vision of what a PMO could do, what project management could do for the company, was not being realized with this PMO. At this point in time, I would ask, has anybody seen this picture before?
Oh, yes.
Many of you may know there is research studies by many sources that show that 25% of PMOs fail within their first year. 50% of PMOs are closed within their second year, and 75% of PMOs are shut down after 4 years. And this is one of the reasons why. Because too often, project management office managers advance cookie-cutter strategies, people, process, tools, right away without first understanding the business problems that the company has, that the leadership team has, for which a PMO can best address. Now, after the 6-month checkpoint, the leadership team met with the PMO manager, and the PMO manager was asked by the leadership team why the PMO isn't being more helpful to their needs, at which the PMO manager replied, "Your needs and problems are outside the scope of my PMO." Well, you can imagine that didn't go too well. And after a year, the PMO manager resigned. The CEO wanted him to stay on. Half the leadership team wanted to close the PMO and said, "Let's don't ever do that again. It didn't work." But the other half of the team, including the CEO, wanted to give it another go. And he reached out to that second PMO manager that they interviewed, that they liked a real lot, told that manager what had happened over the last year, and offered him the job. The second PMO manager was very happy to join the company. And unlike the first PMO manager, rather than presenting a strategy in his second week, the second PMO manager scheduled a meeting using the Nimawashi technique. He met with the leadership team to understand what are the top 3 business problems that the company has. Not 10, not 20, not 100, but what are the top 3 problems that you would like the PMO to solve in the next year? And based upon those 3 problems, what is the vision and mission and goals, objectives that you would like your PMO to have? And based upon the PMO solving your top 3 problems, what is the value to the business of the PMO doing that? So you see, the second PMO manager, before presenting a strategy, met with the leadership team to understand the problems that the company had, for which the PMO could develop a strategy to serve. And what is the business value to the leadership team for solving those problems? Now, this was the leadership team ending position. And while this was good for their PMO, this would not necessarily be good for my PMO or your PMO. But this was what the leadership team wanted the PMO to do. The top 3 problems to be solved by the PMO: 1, poor forecasting and management of project-based revenue; 2, not enough capacity to perform more projects; 3, lack of visibility of all the projects of the company. And you can see what the vision and mission was for the PMO. The vision to be an enabling and facilitating organization that's focused on and accountable for the project-based success of the company. And the mission to develop and execute annual plans and strategies that solve the major project-related problems of the company. And you see the goals and objectives. So it's perfectly clear to the leadership team and the PMO manager what's expected. And also you see the leadership team assessment of the value of the PMO. And that is the value in their assessment of addressing the top 3 problems. From this starting point, the second PMO manager developed and executed a strategy that met the goals and objectives that the leadership team had for the PMO. Now, before we go further, it's very easy for project management offices and well-intended PMO managers, it's very easy to not be business-driven. It's not anyone's fault. It happens all over the world. So it's an institutional problem. It can't be blamed individual. So the point is, as we think about project management and project management offices that help establish project management, ensure the PMO is business-driven. The constituents of the PMO, the people that the PMO serves, the constituents determine the mandate, the purpose of the PMO, and the value. And when that is done, there is never a need to sell the PMO. In fact, selling the PMO is a sign of poor business management. So the constituents determine the purpose of the PMO plans and executes strategy. And the strategy is in order to meet the end objectives. So the means is the strategy, and the end to be achieved is the mandate or the purpose of the PMO. And I hope we would all agree that without the ends to be achieved first established, there can be no sensible discussion of the means or the strategy. Yet this happens all the time. Oftentimes, PMOs will advance a strategy without first truly understanding what the purpose of the PMO, as determined by the leadership team, is. Now, if we talk about business-driven project management, there's a couple of foundations. And these are a few of the foundational concepts of the business-driven PMO. The ABCs of business-driven project management. And I'll go through each of these very quickly, because each of these concepts, in my opinion, are misapplied in today's project management profession. And I'd like to challenge you to think about that. To think about, are we, as a project management profession, applying project management correctly? So let's talk about this. We'll talk about the purpose of a PMO. we'll talk about the project management triangle, and we'll talk a little bit about managing projects, managing portfolios, and managing maturity. So, what is the purpose of a PMO? 90% of project management professionals and PMO managers incorrectly answer this question. And I'd like for you to think about the answer in your heads. And I would like to suggest that maybe not 90% of you, but at least 50% of you will also answer this question wrong. And it's not your fault. It's just the way we've been conditioned to think about PMOs. So what do I mean? The purpose of a PMO is not to develop standards for the management of projects. The purpose of a PMO is not to support, report, train, coach, and mentor. The purpose of a PMO is not to do the right projects and then do them right. You see, most folks answer what is the purpose of a PMO by describing what a PMO does. And the descriptions of what a PMO does are good descriptions, but they do not answer the question, what is the purpose of a PMO? So the purpose of a PMO is to best address the project-related issues and opportunities of the constituent leadership team for whom the PMO was created and exists to serve, and for which business as usual, sans PMO, without a PMO, is not a viable or the best option. So the purpose of the PMO is different than what a PMO does. Most people answer the question, what is the purpose of a PMO, by saying things like it develops standards, it supports, it trains. And all those questions are good questions and good answers, but to the wrong question. Next, let's talk about the project management triangle. Many of you are familiar with the project management triangle, and you know that at the points of the triangle we have scope, time, and cost. And initially, the project management triangle is intended to reveal biases for the project. So if I'm talking to a project stakeholder, I can ask them, what's most important for the project? Is it delivering the scope? Is it meeting the schedule? Is it meeting the budget? And these triple constraints we try to manage to. But the project management triangle was never intended to be a measurement system or a management system. And the idea that at the very beginning of the project, when we know least about it, we will establish the scope and the budget and the schedule and have a mindset that if we don't meet that scope, budget, and schedule, that's bad. That's a misapplication of the project management triangle. There's no better person than Mark Langley, the CEO of the Project Management Institute, to speak to this. 2 years ago, at the Gartner Group Project Portfolio Management Summit, Mark Langley was a guest speaker, and at the end of his presentation, one of the members of the audience asked Mr. Langley why project management has such a bad track record and why PMOs have such a bad track record. And Mark Langley's response was, if we only speak the language of project management, as in scope, time, and cost, then project management as a profession will fail today's businesses. And Mark Langley went on to advise that we need a new project management triangle, one that has, sure, project management at one point by our technical standards, but at the other 2 points, business acumen and leadership. Now let's talk about some of that business acumen. And we'll talk about it in the context of managing a project. This is one of my favorite project examples. In this exercise, I'd like to ask you, which project manager did a better job? These 2 projects, project 1 and 2, are the exact same project. Think of one project being done in Bucharest and another project being done here in Orlando, Florida. But they're the exact same project. They have the exact same phases, One project manager managed it one way, and another project manager managed it another way. So which project manager did a better job? Well, the first project manager wanted to make scope, time, and cost measures. This gives the appearance of good project management. So the first project manager asked each of the 5 phase leads, how long will it take for you to complete your phase? And when they responded 20 days, the first project manager said, well, if I give you 25, can you have it done by 25 days? For sure. Now the second project manager had a different approach. The second project manager talked to the stakeholders and asked them about the project. And the stakeholders told the second project manager that this project is a time-to-market project, and as soon as the project is completed, there will be a $25,000 per day benefit. And the stakeholders went on to say that it was okay if the project manager scheduled the project very aggressively and missed a few of the dates, because they would rather have the project complete as soon as possible. And after the project was over, no one would look over the project manager's shoulder and say he was a bad project manager because he aggressively scheduled the project and didn't meet some of the phases. So the second project manager asked the phase leads how long would it take for each phase, and when they said 20 days, he replied, can you complete it in 15? So the second project manager stressed the schedule to deliver the project as soon as possible, which was excellent project management. And the first project manager, quite frankly, squandered $1 million in the name of good project management, having all of those green status icons. And this leads me to the question, what is buffering? If I were to ask you what is buffering, I'm sure many of you know the technique, and many of you may have used the technique. And in the current version of the Project Management Institute PMBOK guide, it talks about buffering in the project time management knowledge area. But it only talks about buffering in the context of adding time to a schedule. You can have negative buffering too. In fact, there are many projects in which you should do negative buffering to try to squeeze out any and all possible time in the schedule. So if we talk about time management from a business-driven project management perspective, yes, time management is addressed in the PMBOK, and there are best practices and techniques for it. But what about the time value of money? This is the idea that $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. And more importantly, what about the money value of time? This is the idea that time has an effect on value. There's a tremendous difference between first to market with a new product versus last to market. So there's contingent value, opportunity windows, penalties and fines. And then there's time cycles. There's economic cycles where you have peaks and valleys. And there's technology adoption life cycles. How well is this addressed in our project management standards, whether you're talking about PMBOK or Prince 2? The answer is, it's not. And here's a good example of how important time management really is. This happens to be an example of business cycles. And in this example, we have a merger and acquisition project management office. This is a PMO in which all the projects are merger and acquisition projects. They have about 100 projects in the portfolio, and this company works to identify small companies to be acquired that typically are about $20 million in revenue with a 25% net earnings before tax. So when they acquire these companies, the acquisition price or enterprise value is usually around 5 times net earnings before tax. Now, a $20 million company with a 25% net earnings before tax. That would be $5 million times 5. So the acquisition price, on average, is $25 million. But if we're at the peak of a growth cycle, at the peak of economic growth cycles, the peak price is 150% of enterprise value, or $37.5 million. Likewise, if we're at the valley or the trough price, this is called the discount, it's 50%, or $12.5 million. So this is a huge difference in the value of these merger and acquisition projects. And without knowing how best to manage time, this company could very easily pay much, much more than it would like to for the various companies that it plans to acquire. Again, how well is project time management addressed in our industry standards by way of business-driven considerations? For example, the time value of money, the money value of time, and time cycles. And the answer is, it's not. So when we talk about business-driven project management, it's not enough to talk about best practices like Prince2 and PMBOK. Rather, those are very good and foundational, but we must also incorporate a much greater set of business knowledge in the management of our projects. Now let's give a portfolio management example. In this exercise, I like to ask that you think about being the Project Portfolio Management Executive Committee. So all of us are the executive committee, and we're trying to select a project. Business is good, revenues are exceeding plan, and the net earnings before tax is 20%. We have two project opportunities. Project A costs $500,000 and has a $2 million benefit. Project B costs $500,000 and has a $5 million benefit. Which project is better, A or B? And who would like more information? Now, I know you all would like more information, so here it is. In both projects, the time to benefit is less than 6 months, and the benefit recurs annually. In both projects, the project duration is 6 months and the risk is low. And for the project description, Project A, this project will improve the supply chain and result in reduced operating costs. And Project B, this project will enhance a current product line and will result in additional sales revenue. So which project is the more deserving project? Well, the only way we can answer this is to come to a common currency, because Project A is a different benefit type than Project B. What I mean by that is Project A reduces costs. Project B increases sales. A sales dollar is not the same thing as a cost dollar. At a 20% net earnings before tax, it takes $5 of revenue to equate to $1 of expense. So Project A, with the revenue equivalent benefit of $10 million, is the better of the two projects. Again, how well is this addressed in our industry standards? In the Project Management Institute standard, the Portfolio Management Standard, they talk about portfolio management, evaluation, and selection techniques, and give examples of spreadsheet weighted values, weighted value analysis. And you can do all the weighted value analysis you want, but if you don't create a common currency for different dollar types, the analysis will be incorrect. And the OOGC standards make the same mistake. They don't treat revenue dollars and cost dollars differently. So now let's move to business-driven PMO maturity. Many people and organizations view project management only through the traditional PMOs, such as a strategic PMO, an IT PMO, or perhaps a PMO and a software development crew. But project management and PMOs are not limited to IT, enterprise, and strategic projects, nor are project manager and PMO manager career paths. And a good way to view project management maturity is taking a look at an analysis that shows two dimensions. At one dimension, what kind of technique for managing projects are we going to use? Scientific plan-driven management at the bottom, or the principles of complex adaptive systems at the top? And when we say project management, are we referring to just the formal projects of the organization, or are we referring to all of the projects that an organization has? So from this 2x2 grid, we can take a look at project management and PMO maturity. Now, most PMOs are only in the bottom left corner. They use plan-driven techniques like PMBOK or PRINCE2 to the formal projects of the PMO. And this is where PMI and OGC pretty much live. Some PMOs are adopting Agile, especially for software development. And of course, projects exist in all landscapes, whether appreciated by the business or PMO or not. And my favorite example of this is an example of a software salesman that was managing a large project. It was a sale of a large, complex system to a customer. It was a 9-month effort, a $2 million sale forecasted in the second quarter. The company was an $80 million firm with a $3.1 billion market cap. The company had a $20 million forecast for the second quarter, and the salesman had a project delay of 10 days. So the sales slipped to the third quarter. Because the sales slipped, the company missed its quarterly performance forecast by $2 million, and the stock price fell from $84 to $42 per share overnight. So the salesman's project management skills, or lack thereof, cost this company $1.5 billion in market cap. Who was fired on account of this project mishap? Was it the salesman, the sales VP, the CFO, the CEO? How about the PMO manager? This company had a PMO. Well, the CFO was fired 1 week after this mishap, and the CEO of the company also lost his job by the end of the year. But I ask you, believe project management is a profession, there is no poor example of the profession than to have a project difficulty cost the company half of its value, while no one within the profession had a care or role to play. You see, the PMO manager had a team of certified PMPs, and they were busy on the formal projects of the PMO, which is fine. But my point is, this company had a project mishap that cost the company half its value, and not one of the members of the PMO or PMO manager had a role to play. So my question is, how big does a project mishap have to be before the PMO should be involved or should care? This is just an example of the importance of the projects that exist in every part of the organization, not just the formal projects of the PMO. Last year, I had the opportunity to speak in Australia to the association, the Australian Association of Project Management. They actually call it the Australian Institute of Project Management, the AIPM. And in my presentation to about 100 members of the association, I asked them how many people belong to the association. And of course, they all belong to the Australian Institute for Project Management. It's kind of like our PMI over here. I asked them how many had received the current Project Manager magazine. That's the industry magazine for the Australian Institute for Project Management. And they responded that they all had. I then asked how many had read it. And the project managers in attendance said they all had read the magazine. I then asked if they remembered the full column advertisement on page 7 of the magazine, and no one remembered it. So I showed it to them. Salesforce launches project management application do.com. I then asked, what kinds of companies use Salesforce.com? Well, lots of companies. Who are the users of this new project management tool? Well, of course, sales, marketing, and business development kinds of people. What kinds of projects do these users manage? Sales projects, marketing projects, business development projects. How important are these projects to the business? Very important. And then I asked, what percent of the project managers and PMOs in the audience have done anything about this? Even when a vendor makes an advertisement in their own industry magazine, the formal project managers and formal PMO managers are still blind. They still can't see the forest for the trees. Why is it that we can be so concerned about the projects of the PMO and at the same time not realize that project management exists in other parts of the company, project tools, project best practices, and very important projects exist? And what, if anything, are we doing to help? If it's good for us to be high levels of project management maturity in our formal PMOs, is it not good for the business as usual project managers to be higher levels of maturity in their PMOs? A good example of this project management outside of the formal PMO is the example of the 1984 Olympics. In the 1984 Olympics, there was a corporate sponsor. The lead corporate sponsor, in this case IBM, was concerned over massive program and project issues related to the Olympics of 1984. They asked Harrison Owen, the leading expert in complex adaptive systems, to help. Now, if you don't know Harrison Owen, I would suggest you make a note and maybe Google him and find out more. But Harrison Owen is attributed to be the pioneer in complex adaptive systems. And of course, complex adaptive systems is a body of knowledge that about 15 years ago, the software developers that got together in Colorado that wrote the Agile Manifesto, they borrowed the principles from complex adaptive systems to develop what is now known as the Agile Manifesto, which of course has turned into a whole community of practice surrounding Agile, with the Agile Alliance and the Scrum Alliance, the certification programs, and the other Agile best practice organizations. So they brought Harrison Owen to help. He scheduled a two-day meeting, a two-day open space technology meeting, and invited the 70 corporate sponsors to come. And in 2 days, they sat in a circle. They pulled up a bulletin board of project issues and program issues. They organized the issues, and over the course of the 2 days, they met as small sub-teams to work out the issues. And there was no rules. There was no plan-driven methodology. The only rule was the law of 2 feet, and that is, if you're not contributing or participating or learning, use your 2 feet and go someplace else where you can. The end result of this 2-day open space style meeting was an updated program plan with over 2,500 new work breakdown structure items to the 1984 Olympic Program Management Plan. The point is, no project manager could use management vis-a-vis Prince or PMBOK, and in 2 days updated the program with 2,500 new work breakdown structure items with input from 70 people. This speaks to the importance of complex adaptive systems, of Agile techniques, whether it's Agile software development, Agile project management, or just incorporating Agile in our daily business lives. In fact, complex adaptive systems and Agile is so important that Robert Handler of the Gartner Group, who is the Project Portfolio Management Senior Advisor, says, what most do today under the umbrella of Project Portfolio Management, PPM, is becoming dangerous. Today's businesses operate in a complex world, a complex adaptive system, attempting to isolate and decompose change efforts into discrete projects through the application of scientific management approaches, PMBOK, Prince 2, that made sense a century ago when things were less complex, is inappropriate to do today. And applying bloated project management techniques must stop. So it's not just Agilistas and certified Scrum Masters that are advocates of agile and complex adaptive systems. All of the leading management consultants are on the agile and complex adaptive systems bandwagon. So in summary, business-driven project management is all about being driven by business needs, not just industry standards. Yes, the standards are important, but we must apply them in the context of the needs of the business. And we must be mindful that the constituents of the PMO determine the purpose of the PMO mandate, and they determine goals, objectives, and the value of the fulfillment of the mandate. And then the PMO can determine the strategy. They can plan and execute the strategy. And the PMO can establish meaningful metrics and KPIs that are related to PMO objectives. So we want to manage project management and the PMO like a business unit, not a staff organization or a services organization or a community practice or center of excellence or whatever otherwise term we use. We want to manage the PMO business unit. We want to recast the purpose of the PMO with the constituents of the PMO periodically. For most organizations, that will be once a year. We want to understand the project-related business issues and opportunities to be addressed. And we can't address every issue, because if everything is important, nothing is important. No other organization would allow themselves to have to be responsible for solving every single problem, and neither should a PMO. A PMO should be very narrow in what it seeks to accomplish. And the PMO must determine how best to address the project-related issues and opportunities by using not just plan-driven techniques, but all of the best available techniques, PMBOK, Agile, and others, relative to the needs of the project. And the value to the constituents of addressing their project-related issues and opportunities is very important, because that's the value of the PMO. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that the excellent work of the Project Management Institute and of the OGC and the other associations is in any way, shape, or form bad. To the contrary, it's fantastic. You know, the Project Management Institute and the other industry associations have created knowledge for us to apply. But there must be balance in how we apply the knowledge, and the balance of our best practice standards and practical application is really what we mean by business-driven project management. Now, I'd like to have a brief quiz. I always like to have a quiz in my presentation, because if I've not made you a little bit angry, making you take a quiz will certainly do it. So I have a few questions. True or false? Purpose of the PMO: to establish and maintain standards for the management of projects, or is it to fulfill the leadership team determined mandate? Purpose of project management: is it to apply the knowledge areas and process groups of the PMBOK via a life cycle model? Or is the purpose of project management to apply the most effective project management techniques, PMBOK, Prince, Agile, Six Sigma, for the given project based upon stakeholder biases and business needs? And then the value of the PMO. Is the value of the PMO the value of the benefits of the projects delivered by the PMO? Many people say it is, but you can have projects without a PMO. Or is the value of the PMO the leadership team assessment, quantitative and qualitative, of the value of the fulfillment of the PMO mandate? I hope you'd all agree that the X's are the incorrect answers and the check marks are the correct answers. And for many people, this is different than what you may have thought 1 hour ago. Now, I would like to wrap up by first thanking you once again for allowing me to be part of your day. I really appreciate it. I was able to see some of you earlier when we were trying to get the Jobber video to work, but I regret not being able to see all of you. If I could see all, I suspect I would be seeing three kinds of expressions, as you see in this PowerPoint slide. The first expression may be, if only I had this information when we first set up our PMO. The second expression, I'm not sure I like this guy, but you give me a lot to think about. And of course, the third expression, I can immediately apply the business-driven project management techniques. So that was the purpose of my presentation, to share with you the business-driven project management and business-driven PMO perspectives that basically call for a balance of both the knowledge contained within our industry standards and the best possible practical application, which for most organizations will be a balance between the benefits of plan-driven techniques and approaches, as well as the benefits of agile techniques and principles. At this point, let me turn it back over to the moderator, and if you have any questions, I would be delighted to try to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mark. I will try to take some of the questions from the room. Do we have questions in the room? Yeah, so it was too deep, or, okay, we have the first question. It was not too deep.
Gave me something to think about.
Okay, so it seems that, Mark, you gave us something to think about, a lot of to think about. Question.
Hello, Mark. I have read an interesting book, Management 3.0. Is it, do you speak also about complexity and including complexity when thinking about projects?
I heard half the question. Can you repeat it?
I have read a book that praised and offered a lot of good advices about including complex systems into project management, complex systems theory into project management. Do you believe it's advisable, and do we need to look into that?
I'm so sorry, but I'm not able to hear the question. Okay. Rita, can you rephrase it for me?
No, let's leave it like this.
Okay, so we will put the question in writing.
Thanks for typing it in. My headset is so loud that it's hard for me to hear, so I apologize for my sound equipment. Yes, the complexity theory to project management. Very good question. Many people feel that the complexity theory is very appropriate for complex projects. Maybe not all projects, but complexity theory really speaks to many of the principles of agile, and I don't mean agile software development, but the complex adaptive systems, the principles of simple rules, emergent relationships, self-forming teams. So in many ways, complexity theory is simpler in that it's not as plan-driven as PMBOK or Prince, but the principles of complex theory are very, very appropriate for complex projects. And many people say that almost all projects are complex projects. So very, very good question, and I would heavily agree that complex theory is a very good fit for just about any project effort, and that many times the principles of complex theory are a good approach for complex projects, because it's very, very hard to plan in advance and set things like cost, schedules, scope for a project when the environment is just too complex. So very good question. Complexity theory is very, very appropriate to consider and apply in the projects of the PMO.
Okay then. So I still cannot figure out how this works. So we will thank you very much here. And if we have further questions, I will advise the audience. Write them directly to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Have a good week. Bye-bye.